of this body.
Congressman Rose tweeted, quote, "This is what I get for telling my son Guy to smile at the camera for his little brother." I know how that goes. Well, that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for June 3rd, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. President Biden launches two gambits to solve two thorny challenges. First, on immigration, an executive order significantly limiting migration at the southern border. Our Camila Montoya Galvez has the details. The new policy, a new challenge for Mexico's brand new president. In the country's 200-year history, the first woman in the top post. What's ahead for President Claudia Sheinbaum? The second Biden gambit, a three-part ceasefire deal to end the war between Israel and Hamas. We'll have an update on how it's being received 8 months into the war. In Wilmington, Delaware, just blocks from President Biden's campaign headquarters, his son Hunter faces the first day of his federal criminal gun trial. Plus, we'll have reports on what's hiding on the dark web, a new pollution report on our dark air, and the dark shadow of loneliness in the workplace. Why that meeting really should be an email. We will illuminate. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report along the U.S.-Mexico border. CBS News has learned President Biden will issue an executive order this week that would partially shut down asylum processing. The action will allow officials to turn away migrants that enter the U.S. illegally without hearing their asylum claims. It will use the same presidential authority that was used by then-President Trump in 2017 to issue his so-called travel ban, which barred people from several Muslim-majority countries from entering the U.S. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez joins me now. So, Camila, how will this executive order work?
Hi, John. This will be a massive shift in policy here along the U.S.-Mexico border. President Biden is expected to invoke his executive authority to try to suspend asylum processing between official border crossings here along the U.S.-Mexico border. That would be triggered after daily illegal crossings surpass 2,500, John, meaning that this executive order will certainly take effect immediately after being issued, because over the past 4 weeks, Border Patrol has been apprehending an average of 3,800 migrants each day across the U.S.-Mexico border. It will allow U.S. immigration officials, John, to quickly deport migrants back to Mexico or to their home countries without processing their asylum claims. And this effectively will suspend U.S. asylum law between ports of entry. Importantly, asylum processing, John, will continue at official ports of entry. Those are the international bridges that facilitate legal trade and travel. Also, unaccompanied children, we are told, will be exempt. This, again, will be a seismic shift in policy here at the border, but I do have to underscore, John, that it is likely to be challenged in federal court.
Camila, before we get to the seismic shift and reversal for President Biden, just one more detailed question. Does this mean that it stops once it gets to 2,500 every day, or it stops and then doesn't get turned on again at these non-points of entry for some period of time?
Once Border Patrol apprehensions reach that threshold, John, the U.S. will be able to say that the country is essentially full in terms of asylum claims, and it will bar asylum requests between ports of entry. 1,500 people will still be allowed to request asylum at official border crossings per day, but people who cross the border illegally, the Rio Grande in Texas or the desert in New Mexico, Arizona, and California illegally, will be barred from claiming asylum in the U.S. And that asylum shutdown, that partial asylum ban, will not be lifted, John, we are told, until illegal border crossings fall below 1,500.
And Camilo, you mentioned that this is such a reversal for the Biden administration. How do they defend or explain this change and why it's necessary now?
this is a critical question, John. Soon after taking office in 2021, President Biden promised to restore the U.S. asylum system, and he strongly criticized Trump administration policies that he denounced as draconian and inhumane. But 3 years later, the administration and President Biden, they are finding themselves, John, embracing drastic limits on asylum because of the unprecedented migration crisis here along the U.S.-Mexico border. In each of the past 2 fiscal years, Border Patrol has recorded over 2 million migrant apprehensions. That has created not only a humanitarian crisis for the Biden administration, but also a political headache for President Biden going into his re-election campaign. So while this move may well be struck down in court, John, it could send a strong political message for the administration as President Biden hopes to convey that he is taking a stronger, tougher stance here at the border.
Camila Montoya Galvez in windy El Paso, Texas. Thank you, Camila. For the first time in Mexico's 200-year history, a woman has been elected as the president. Claudia Sheinbaum, a climate scientist and former Mexico City mayor, is the projected winner after Sunday's election. Sheinbaum will also be Mexico's first Jewish president. The 61-year-old beat the opposition by roughly 30 points. She was, of course, the favored candidate and will replace outgoing President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. Ryan Berg joins me now. He's the director of the Americas program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much for being with me. Mexico is the U.S. largest trading partner. Migrant flow has come through Mexico, and it's also the primary route for major narcotics into the U.S. How do you expect the new president will manage the relationship with the U.S., given those 3 important areas?
Well, thanks for having me on, John. Look, Claudia Sheinbaum promised to continue the fourth transformation policies of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. And so there's a certain element of policy that will not change in Mexico because she explicitly campaigned on continuity. However, I think it's difficult to find someone who is more frictious with the United States than Andres Manuel. And so I do anticipate that the personality differences between Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador and Claudia Sheinbaum will mean that perhaps there are slightly fewer frictions between the United States and Mexico on some of these incredibly important issues like migration and security cooperation.
As you mentioned, Sheinbaum was picked by her predecessor, who was popular during his reign, but you and your colleagues also say that he oversaw, quote, the bloodiest presidential term in Mexican history. Explain what you mean.
Well, those are facts on the security front, John. So by about year 5 of a 6-year term, there were more homicides in terms of numbers than in the entire 6-year term of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's predecessor, Enrique Peña Nieto. Those are numbers from his own government. And so the security policy that he pursued under his 6 years was an unwise one. It was essentially a campaign slogan from his 2018 campaign, Hugs, Not Bullets, which was essentially focusing on the root causes of violence in Mexico as opposed to interdiction and going after cartels and the territorial control that they possess. And it's had very unfortunate consequences for Mexico and for Mexicans in the form of the most homicidal 6 years that we've seen in a Mexican president's history.
You've also written about democratic backsliding that is slowly happening in Mexico. Give me an example of that, and also how much of an issue is that for the country and for U.S. relations with Mexico?
Well, backsliding in Mexico, the U.S. southern neighbor, and as you mentioned in your intro, the most important trading partner that we have, is a fundamental interest of ours. We need a robust democracy in Mexico for Mexico to play the strategic partnership that we want it to play with the United States. So I just think it's important to say that at the outset. You're right, John. We put out a recent paper which showed that on 16 different measurements, AMLO has backslid on about 14 of them. There are things like the independence of regulatory institutions, judicial independence, stepping in areas where normally the president doesn't step in. For example, after he decided to dox a New York Times reporter and give public information away in a country where it's very violent and very dangerous to be a journalist, he literally said that the law does not apply to the president. The moral and political authority of the president is above the law. So there have been a number of very troubling incidents indeed in Mexico, and we sincerely hope that the next president takes a different path when it comes to the robustness of institutions and democracy concerns.
AMLO, the nickname for Lopez Obrador. One last question about the new President Sheinbaum is a climate scientist, and Mexico benefits, obviously, from oil production. Any indication that her background will affect the energy sector in a way that's different from her predecessor or that might be notable?
This has been one of the most interesting areas of speculation, John, because she campaigned, again, explicitly on continuation of some of these so-called fourth transformation policies of Lopez Obrador. Central to those policies are the upholding of the prime position of Pemex and CFE, big state-owned enterprises, in the oil sector and electricity provision sector. So I don't think we're going to see too much of a change there. Where she has shown some distinction from Lopez Obrador is an interest in investing more in green energy at the same time as she's upholding some of these state-owned enterprises. So we might see a little bit of both, but we certainly won't see Mexico walking away from its fundamental support of these state champions.
Ryan Berg with the Centers for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much. Israel confirmed the deaths of 4 more hostages held by Hamas on Monday. Its military says the men died several months ago in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis when Israel was operating there. Meanwhile, the White House is expecting Israel to move forward with a ceasefire proposal laid out by President Biden if Hamas agrees to it. The president outlined a 3-phase deal Friday to end the nearly 8-month-long war. But in a statement over the weekend, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, quote, a non-starter. Imtiaz Tayeb has more details from Tel Aviv. Imtiaz?
Well, with Prime Minister Netanyahu insisting on eliminating Hamas and Hamas continuing to refuse a truce without a permanent ceasefire, it seems President Biden's outline may not be achievable, and that could mean many more months of war. And for the people of Gaza, who today alone we've seen over 40 people killed in separate Israeli strikes, and for people here in Israel who are so desperate for the hostages to come home, and upon learning that the remains of 4 more hostages have been discovered, it seems that they are stuck between these leaders who cannot seem to find a path forward to end this misery which has affected so many people for so many months. John.
Imtiaz Tayeb in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Now to Capitol Hill, where Dr. Anthony Fauci testified Monday in a contentious hearing before a Republican-led House panel investigating the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and the U.S. response. For several hours, lawmakers questioned Fauci over his leadership at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. They claim agency-funded lab work led Chinese scientists to develop the coronavirus in their Wuhan lab. The theory has been disputed by scientists and health officials who point to evidence that indicates the pandemic originated from animals sold at a market in Wuhan. Dr. Fauci addressed these accusations in his opening statement.
Several who at first were concerned about lab manipulation became convinced that the virus was not deliberately manipulated. They concluded that the most likely scenario was a spillover from an animal reservoir. The accusation being circulated that I influenced these scientists to change their minds by bribing them with millions of dollars in grant money is absolutely false and simply preposterous.
The 83-year-old also became emotional when discussing the threats he and his family have faced since 2020. He says he still relies on protective security and receives regular, credible death threats due to misinformation related to his role advising the public during the pandemic. Do you know where your personal information is? When there's a data breach, personal information sometimes ends up on the dark web. But what does that mean? And what is a dark web anyway? Plus, Hunter Biden's trial on federal gun charges has started. On day 1, the jury was picked. We'll tell you what else happened. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
President Biden's son Hunter is on trial on federal gun charges in his home state of Delaware. 12 jurors were sworn in Monday at the courthouse, which is walking distance from his father's campaign headquarters. Opening statements will begin Tuesday. It's the first trial ever for a child of a sitting American president. Prosecutors accuse Hunter Biden of lying about his drug use when he bought a gun in 2018. If convicted, Biden could face up to 25 years in prison and $750,000 in fines. Though Hunter Biden has written extensively about his drug addiction, he has pleaded not guilty to the charges. He is also facing a federal tax charge in California and has pleaded not guilty to that as well. CBS News reporter Erica Brown is following the trial and joins us now from Wilmington. Erica, walk us through basically what happened here on this first day in the courtroom on Monday.
Good evening, John. Well, proceedings got underway here just under 9 a.m. Hunter Biden filing in with his attorneys, and in a show of support, his family sitting directly behind him, including First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, his sister Ashley Biden, his wife Melissa Cohen Biden, and also a close friend of his, Kevin Morris. And throughout the day, the First Family and Hunter Biden was largely non-reactive as dozens of jurors were questioned about their views on his case, particularly about their views on politics, the Department of Justice, and whether or not they felt that investigations had been influenced by politics, and also their views on addiction, whether they themselves or people close to them had struggles, personal struggles with drug abuse and alcohol. Hunter Biden was attentive, taking notes frequently, speaking to his attorneys frequently, and ultimately, as you mentioned, 12 jurors were seated and 4 alternates were also seated. Of that main jury pool of 12, that includes 6 men and 6 women.
Erica, you mentioned the family members who were there. Have we heard from the president himself, President Biden?
We have heard from President Biden today, and President Biden has been careful not to comment on the specifics of this case. And in a statement today, he also said that he won't comment on a pending federal case, but he has, as a dad, boundless love for his son and, quote, confidence in him and respect for his strength. He says that he and Dr. Joe Biden will continue to support his son and continue to be there for him through this process.
And finally, what's the next stage in this? What are some of the key witnesses we're expected to hear from in the trial? And also, obviously, this is about a very personal moment in Hunter Biden's life when he was in the throes of addiction. What are we expected to hear in terms of the personal crucible he was going through while this was happening?
Right. So the next steps are going to be opening statements. And then right after that, the prosecution is going to get into their witness list, which right now includes at least 9 witnesses, potentially more than that. And we expect to hear from women who Hunter Biden, who was romantically linked with. That includes his ex-wife, Kathleen, and also Haley Biden, who was a widow of the late Bo Biden. And we expect prosecutors to ask them about their firsthand accounts of Hunter Biden's drug use. In their pretrial filings, prosecutors outlined what they said these witnesses could disclose, how they found drugs and drug paraphernalia in Hunter Biden's belongings, how they were concerned for him. They will also include evidence that includes text messages, photos, videos, and potentially most critical, Hunter Biden's own words. So in his memoir, he details some of his struggles with addiction leading up to and during the period that prosecutors allege he illegally purchased that firearm.
Erica Brown in Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you so much, Erica. After former President Donald Trump was found guilty in his New York criminal trial, Americans kept their views on the case pretty much the same. Before the verdict, a CBS News poll found 56% of people thought Trump was definitely or probably guilty of the falsifying business records charges against him. After the verdict, 57% said the jury reached the right decision. 51% of the country also says Trump is unfit to be president now that he has been convicted of a crime. He'll be sentenced in this case next month, and he's vowed to appeal the conviction in court. Boeing's long-awaited Starliner space capsule launch was delayed again over the weekend, less than 4 minutes before liftoff. The mission was scrubbed due to a computer malfunction. 3 computers make up the system, and all of them need to work for a launch. NASA, Boeing, and the rocket's manufacturer are working to find out what exactly went wrong.
This is the business that we're in. Everything's got to work perfectly, like we've talked before. Today we got really close. It didn't work for us.
Boeing has been trying to catch up to competitor SpaceX and send crews to space. The company's next attempt to fly 2 astronauts to the International Space Station is scheduled for Wednesday. In a more successful space mission, China landed a spacecraft on the far side of the moon over the weekend. The mission is to collect soil and rock samples from the lesser-known side and compare them to samples from the side facing the Earth. The samples will be dug up from the surface and then transferred to a module orbiting the moon, which will end up on a re-entry capsule set to return to Earth later this month. China remains the only nation to embark on missions to the far side of the moon. Hawaii's Kilauea volcano erupted early Monday morning, but officials say there's no cause for concern right now. The eruption was limited to the volcano's summit in a remote area of the island, officials say. There is no immediate threat to people or infrastructure. Kilauea is one of the most active volcanoes in the world. Last time it erupted was back in September, and that lasted for an entire week. Officials don't know how long this eruption will go on. If it feels like you've been hearing a lot about tornadoes recently, you have. The National Weather Service reported that more than 500 tornadoes happened in May. It's the most of any month in at least 5 years. Activity typically peaks in May anyway, with an average of 278 tornadoes, according to the Weather Channel. June is also expected to see a large number of threats. Wildfire threats are also an issue. A new analysis from the U.S. Forest Service says wildfires are threatening nearly 1/3 of the country's residents and buildings. The report says that more than 115 million people are facing high wildfire risks. especially those living in underserved communities. The summer heat fueling some of those wildfires is picking up in the West. For more, here's Alex Wilson from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Well, we keep storms going. Temperatures changing across the West. Things really heating up when we look at tomorrow's highs. 100 in Redding, 104 in Vegas and in Phoenix, well into the 90s for Bakersfield and for Fresno. Storms again will be an issue in the middle part of the country, but out west, it's all about that warmth, rising to near 110 in Vegas on Wednesday. Same for Phoenix, 109. Thursday highs into the 1-teens for Phoenix and Vegas, 107 Fresno and Bakersfield. Parts of Oklahoma, Arkansas, into Louisiana. That's where we watch the thunderstorms tonight. You can see more storms will build back into sections of Oklahoma, including around Oklahoma City. That complex continues east into the day tomorrow. Now, through tonight, severe weather possible for Oklahoma, Texas, into Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And we've got an area to watch farther north tomorrow. This would include Minneapolis, Kansas City, Des Moines, and Omaha, Nebraska. So a smaller zone, but a lot of populated areas. For more in-depth coverage, watch the Weather Channel on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Alex Wilson, thank you. Still to come, what's bad for the planet is also bad for people. A new report identifies the long-term effects of pollution on our health. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. President Biden is expected to issue an executive order as early as Tuesday that would partially shut down asylum processing along the southern border. The move would allow U.S. immigration officials to quickly deport migrants who enter the country illegally. Sources say the suspect in the Gilgo Beach murders in New York is expected to be indicted on another murder charge this week from an additional killing. But that's all we know right now. Rex Heuermann was arrested last summer and accused of killing several women. Last month, police were seen searching for additional evidence at his Long Island home. Dr. Anthony Fauci testified before a Republican-led House panel Monday on the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic and the government's response. The hearing fell along party lines, with Republicans harshly questioning him and Democrats coming to his defense. This was Fauci's first public Capitol Hill appearance since stepping down in 2022. A new report says pollution is a greater global threat than war, terrorism, addiction, and disease. According to data from a coalition of researchers, pollution was responsible for 8.8 million premature deaths between 2015 and 2022. It reduced worldwide life expectancy by 2.9 years. The authors say there is an immediate need to better monitor these pollutants and study how exposure to them raises cardiovascular risks. Dr. Celine Gounder, CBS News medical contributor and an editor-at-large for public health at KFF, joins us from Washington. Doctor, thank you for being with us. The report found air pollution to be one of the main drivers of these health complications. Explain how that happens and what are the main health complications that result from this pollution?
Well, the main driver of air pollution remains fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels. But you do have other sources of pollution, including other forms of combustion. You were just talking about wildfires earlier in the report today. That's also a significant source of air pollution. And what happens is when you inhale this, it causes significant stress to your cardiovascular system, to your lungs, as well as other organs, and increases your risk for cardiovascular disease. It's now estimated that 1 in 5 deaths from cardiovascular disease are attributable to air pollution.
And are there particular groups that are at risk of these pollution-related illnesses? And also, is there anything they can do, those particular groups?
Well, there are certain groups. It's not really surprising that it would be the very young and the very old who would be at increased risk, pregnant women as well, and then lower income communities that tend to be more exposed to air pollution, whether they perhaps live closer to a highway or to a chemical manufacturing plant. They do tend to be in areas where there is a higher risk and higher exposure.
And what about temperature? That's been shown also to increase risk of cardiovascular illness. Why is that, and how much of a threat does that pose?
Well, when you have increasing temperatures, your body compensates by having a higher heart rate. You might actually feel this when you're outside. When it's hot, that your heart might be beating more quickly. It's also squeezing stronger, so that's putting some real stress on your heart. People also get dehydrated when it's hot out, and that further stresses your cardiovascular system. And when we have a heat wave, we can see as much as a 10% increase in deaths from cardiovascular disease, which is really quite significant when you consider cardiovascular disease is one of the most important causes of death worldwide.
And finally, Doctor, what should be done with all of this information? What can be done at a government level or even an individual level to protect people based on this new information?
Well, at a government level, there are things, for example, having more shade in big cities to address heat islands, planting more trees, that sort of thing. You have some municipalities, Miami, for example, that passed a law that would require employers to provide work breaks, shade, water breaks, and so on for people who work outside. At the same time, you have certain states like Texas and Florida who've actually outlawed such regulations. So there's sort of a back and forth at the governmental level about how to deal with these issues. At an individual level, talk to your doctor, especially if you have cardiovascular disease, about what some of the issues might be with your medications. That can sometimes be a little bit tricky. Be drinking water, be aware of where you can get shade, and also be aware of where cooling centers are in the summer. Dr.
Celine Gounder in Washington, thank you so much. Now to a digest of some foreign news. Economists in Turkey are hoping the worst of a recent inflationary spike is coming to an end. Data from May showed the annual inflation level surpassed 75%. Price increases are hitting the education, housing, and restaurant sectors the hardest. Forecasters had predicted inflation would peak at 75% before dropping. Turkey's central bank has kept interest rates at 50% since March in an effort to try to cool down the economy. A new Microsoft report details an apparent Russian disinformation plot against the 2024 Paris Olympics. It says Russian propagandists have put out fake news videos about terrorism threats at the Olympics in an attempt to scare people from going to the Games. The plot is likely a response to the Olympics banning Russia from the Games because of its unprovoked war in Ukraine. And South Korea will suspend a 2018 deal with North Korea aimed at reducing tensions between the countries. North Korea has sent almost 1,000 trash-filled balloons across the border since Thursday in what it called retaliation for South Korea's activist balloons that dropped leaflets criticizing Pyongyang. The decision to halt the joint agreement will allow South Korea to hold military training near the demarcation line. Pyongyang already abandoned the deal last year. Last week, Ticketmaster confirmed it was hacked. The group claiming that it's behind the breach said it stole the data of some 560 million customers, and it offered to sell those details for $500,000 on the dark web. The 1.3 terabyte cache allegedly includes names, email addresses, phone numbers, and credit card details from users all around the world. It's not the first time hackers have tried to sell personal information on the dark web, nor will it be the last. The term dark web gets thrown around a lot, but what is it exactly? Here to shed some light on the issue is CBS News reporter Zach Hudak. Zach, thanks a lot for being here. So what is this animal? What is the dark web?
John, I think it's easiest to think about it as three categories of the internet. There is the surface web, which you or I or any layperson would think of as pretty much all of the internet. That's what you can search on Google and find. Then there's the deep web. That's what you can't search on Google and find. You need to know where you're going and type that into the ULR bar or find it through some sort of directory. The third is the dark web. And that's where you need specific technology to get into it. You need to use a certain kind of browser that is made to function in a way a little bit different than everything else on the internet. It functions in a way where you are encrypted on both ends. So neither you nor the website you're visiting know where you are or who you are.
So that's perfect if we all want to be hidden and do whatever it is we want to do in this dark web environment. So how does it work once you get there? And how do I know to get the address to type it into my URL in the first place?
You would have to download one of these browsers, like Tor is the most common one. And then once you go there, you go to a wiki page or a directory, and that organizes these various websites, most of which are selling or harboring illegal things in one fashion or another. There is often a reason that they are trying to protect all of this data. And you would go in there and browse and find what you're looking for and click into that site.
And what if I don't want to have anything to do with whatever it is they're selling there, but I'm worried my information is somehow on the dark web? How do I get it out of it?
It's not an easy answer. Once it is there, it is very difficult to get out of there. I talked to a guy today who worked with the FBI as a contractor for 2 decades and now helps private businesses and sometimes individuals try to recover their data. Sometimes what it comes down to is actually paying to get that data back, buying it, pretending that you are someone who's going to use it in an illegal way, but actually just buying it so you have it back. Other than that, you can go to law enforcement, but the problem is they have tremendous difficulties tracking these folks. And even once they have found the person that posted it, you don't know for certain that they didn't post it elsewhere and that it's not living somewhere else in this vast expanse of the dark and deep web.
And so is that true also? Let's say I pay the money to get my stuff back. Aren't I then basically trusting that the person who sold it to me has torn it up or burnt it or whatever? I mean, in theory, they could sell it to me and then go, sell it to somebody else, and I can't go after them because they're on the dark web.
100%. You don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. You have no recourse.
Is this all nefarious? With 2 questions as my last question. One is, what else is being sold on there other than secret information? And then is it always nefarious and bad, the dark web?
Well, there are things like drugs being sold on the dark web. There are occasionally postings for things like body parts. it's very difficult to actually look at the data on this. The only meaningful tranche of it is from about 10 years ago, and since then, the main browser has changed things so that not as much is tracked. But there are many things you can find on there. There are different things, though, that the people who created the dark web as we know it had in mind. There was really a libertarian ideal behind this. These are folks who were saying, the internet really should be a place where you are anonymous, where you are not effectively paying with your own data, with a little piece of yourself when you go to a website. So they wanted to create this ultimate free place, free marketplace. What we're seeing, though, is that to have a safe environment, we need some laws. We need some structure of a society.
Zach, fantastic. Really appreciate it. Zach Hudak on the dark web. It's sometimes hard to feel lonely at the office, surrounded by colleagues, meetings, and water cooler breaks, but it turns out a majority of Americans actually feel quite alone while working. We'll speak to a sociologist about why this is happening. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discovery, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Americans' personal savings rate, or the percentage of disposable income a person has left over after expenses, has slipped to a 16-month low. The Bureau of Economic Analysis says that number was 3.6% in April. The savings rate skyrocketed to an all-time high of 32% in April of 2020. during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Experts say many Americans have been working through their savings due to higher interest rates by the Federal Reserve. According to Bloomberg, about 1 in 6 credit card users are using at least 90% of their available credit. Economists warn a drop in people's accumulated savings could weaken the consumer spending going forward and lead to a slowdown in economic growth. A glitch at the New York Stock Exchange led to trading halts on multiple stocks. A technical issue showed Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway down 99% at one point. Now, the issue was resolved before noon. The exchange says it is canceling incorrect trades for several companies. GameStop shares were on the move again Monday, finishing the day up 21%. This comes after influencer Roaring Kitty, the person behind the meme stock craze, posted an image over the weekend suggesting he owns 5 million shares of GameStop. Those shares were worth nearly $116 million before the company's surge on Monday. The pandemic has had a big impact on the way we interact with other humans, from remote learning for kids to having our takeout be left at the door rather than grabbing it directly from a delivery person. But COVID-19 has undoubtedly had one of the biggest effects on the workplace, with the switch to hybrid or remote work and increased reliance on social media and technology. A recent survey finds that 69% of employees are unsatisfied with their social connections at the office. 43% say they don't feel connected with their colleagues at all. Sociologist Tracy Brower says this is because we've, quote, elevated convenience over connection and just aren't in touch with human beings within the community as much as we used to be. And the author of that article, Tracy Brower, joins us now. She is a senior contributor at Forbes.com and Fast Company, and which is a business and technology magazine. Tracy, thank you. She is also, I should note, author of The Secrets to Happiness at Work and Bring Work to Life. So just the person to talk to. Tracy, you write that there is a difference between being lonely and being alone. Explain the difference to us.
Yeah, the difference is actually really important. One academic study suggests that when we're alone 75% of the time or more, then we're more likely to feel lonely. But the real crux is whether or not we've chosen to be alone. If everything's happening and we've been invited and we've decided not to partake, we tend not to feel lonely. But if we want to be involved and we haven't been invited, if we want to see our coworkers and we don't have the opportunity, if we don't have the choice to be with other people, that is when we're more likely to feel lonely instead of just alone. It's really about control.
And so how do we recognize loneliness at the workplace? Because, you know, a lot of times you can be in a day full of meetings, so you are not alone, but they can make you feel extremely lonely.
Yeah, I think there's actually a really interesting study that suggests that when we're in meetings, sometimes that can actually exacerbate the problem. Partly we want to be with people, but we also want to have the opportunity for more serendipitous interactions. We want to interact organically. We want to get recognition from colleagues. And that doesn't always happen in a scheduled way. That doesn't always happen in a meeting where we're very task-oriented and less relationship-oriented, chit-chatting, exchanging personal details, building relationships. And so that's why sometimes those meetings can actually get in the way of us feeling more connected to others.
And so what does this tell us? How should we think about the ongoing debate about hybrid work, in-person work, working from home, and all of the various permutations that have cropped up in the wake of the pandemic?
It's a great question. One of the things we know is that hybrid work, remote work are really here to stay. They've been on an upward trajectory for decades, and the pandemic accelerated that. However, we have in our society, as you talked about at the opening, really elevated convenience over connection. And we need those connections at both superficial levels and deeper levels to feel less lonely, to have mental health, to have less depression, less anxiety. So the workplace takes on an increasingly important role for us to feel seen, for us to feel connected. And so when we're working together, when we have the opportunity for meaningful work, when we feel connected based on purpose, when we have access to leaders, when we have access to colleagues, those actually move the needle in terms of our mental health and our reduced loneliness.
And so what about people who say, you know, I like some boundaries at my office? What do they do in this environment?
Yeah, that's the big thing. How do we make sure that we're connecting at work, whether we're remote, whether we're hybrid, how we have meaningful connections, and then how we also give people a sense of work-life fulfillment? 3 ideas here for you. One is we want to give people as much choice and control as possible. When people can make some of their own choices about when they come in, how much they come in, how they manage their own work, that's really helpful. We can't do that in all jobs, of course, but the more we can do it, the better. Another thing that's actually really helpful is when organizations really provide guardrails and guidelines for when people want to be in. Organizations and workplaces need to earn the commute. And one of the ways they do that is by giving us the opportunity to be connected with our colleagues. So if we know that certain departments work together, maybe we have guidelines that they're in the office on Tuesdays and Wednesdays together, or we know that we're going to be in the office during core hours from 10 o'clock on a Tuesday to 3 o'clock on a Thursday. Whatever's right for that organization, those guardrails can be helpful. And another thing we know from the work-life literature is predictability is really helpful. When the schedule is really unpredictable, it can be hard to manage all the personal things and the work things. But when we have more predictability and routine in when we're showing up, in how we make those choices about how we balance our work in our life and reach fulfillment, that can be really helpful.
Sociologist Tracy Brower. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you.
Still to come, gymnastics legend Simone Biles breaks her own record and claims another U.S. championship title. We'll take a look at her journey to the Summer Olympics in Paris. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are. Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm gonna remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was gonna be born, he was only gonna live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation.
people looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When it comes to America's top soda, the competition for second place is tougher than first. For the first time in its 139-year history, Dr. Pepper tied with Pepsi as the second favorite soft drink in the United States. According to new sales data, Pepsi and Dr. Pepper both hold just over 8% of the market. Coca-Cola has long reigned supreme, holding more than 19%. Dr. Pepper's rise is attributed to marketing its unique taste, which originally combined 23 flavors. It's also made deals with college football teams and capitalized on bizarre TikTok trends. Gymnastics superstar Simone Biles clinched a record 9th all-around title at the U.S. Gymnastics Championship Sunday in Fort Worth, Texas. The 27-year-old multi-world champion and Olympic gold medalist also won national titles on all 4 apparatuses. This means Biles and runner-up 19-year-old Sky Blakely have automatically qualified for Olympic trials in Minneapolis later this month. That's where the 5 gymnasts for Team USA will be announced for the Paris Olympics. At the last Olympics in Tokyo, Biles pulled out of the all-around final due to a common gymnastics mental block known as the twisties, when an athlete loses track of where their body is during a routine. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. History in Mexico as the country elects its first female president, who is Claudia Sheinbaum, and what's on her list of priorities and agenda. Plus, President Biden will soon sign an executive order to limit asylum along the southern border. We'll explain what's in the policy. And 12 jurors have been seated to hear Hunter Biden's federal gun case in Delaware, what to expect from the trial ahead of the opening statements Tuesday. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you